Izzy? George, you want to say hi again? Nope? Okay. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Olivia. This is a channel where I talk about the presidents and make their favorite desserts. These are the men that shaped the world we live in, so I think at the very least we should know their names. At the very most, we should know what they like to eat, and I'm gonna try to cover everything in between that. And if you haven't seen it, go and watch my video on George Washington so that you can be all caught up. It'll be linked up there. And with all that said, let's continue the journey with HBO royalty, John Adams. And for John, I will be making Abigail Adams Pan-Apple Dowdy. All right, let's get started. I'm gonna start by making the dough first because it has to chill in the fridge for an hour. And then let's get started talking about John Adams. I personally think that John Adams and probably everyone after John Adams might be a little bit more interesting than George Washington just because, you know, what's interesting about someone that everyone likes. John Adams was born in 1735 to the descendants of the Mayflower Pilgrims. You know who they are. When he's 20, he graduates from Harvard and then he becomes a lawyer, which is kind of a basic story at this point. He's kind of like the original Elle Woods.
I object.
In 1764, John Adams marries Abigail Smith. She was 19 and he was 28. They met each other a lot more than 3 times because her parents insisted on a long engagement, which is smart. Ugh, shortening is kind of gross. Abigail Adams was very smart, she was self-educated, she was pretty sassy, and she was really feminist. In one of her letters that she sent to John, she said, "And by the way, in the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular attention is not paid to ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound to any laws in which we have no voice or representation." So she was saying, if you don't write laws that include women, then we will revolt against you. So go Abigail for really trying to talk her husband into doing some good. Abigail and John would go on to have 4 kids. Among those is John Quincy Adams, who would later also become the President of the United States. I'm gonna use my hands for this. This is not working. So before John Adams was president, he was working as a lawyer. And in 1770, American rebels started tormenting these British soldiers in Boston. And the British soldiers were kind of like, go away guys. And the British soldiers were like trying to scare them off. So they all started loading up their bayonets, I think more as a warning. And then the American rebels, they started to throw things at these British soldiers. They threw snowballs, they threw many objects, and then it hit one of the soldiers and he started to fire. And this kind of shocked all the other soldiers into firing as well. So these British soldiers ended up shooting and killing 5 of the American rebels. And this is known as the Boston Massacre. People think of it as like the first deaths of the American Revolution. I've never made dough before. This recipe is not specific at all. So nobody would defend these British soldiers in court because we didn't like the British at this period in time, except for John Adams. Now, John Adams was not in support of the British. He was obviously part of the revolution, but he was the only one who agreed to defend these British soldiers. He did this because he thought that everyone deserved a fair trial, even the British soldiers. This kind of cemented the American justice system, even though it put his family at risk because people probably thought of him as like, why are you defending these soldiers? They're our enemies. But he just really thought that everyone deserved a fair trial, and this cemented the American justice system. And obviously, America is still working out some of the kinks, but I think John Adams had good intentions. Look, dough's actually forming. I'm like really surprised. I've never made dough from hand before. And after the trial, 6 of the 8 soldiers were acquitted, but 2 of them were charged with murder, and they were branded with an M on their thumb. I think that's all they did to them. Couldn't find more research. So after the Boston Massacre and after all of the trials, John Adams serves as a delegate to England. And while he's a delegate, he helped to negotiate the Jay Treaty. Remember, the Jay Treaty cemented the financial ties between Britain and America. It was one of the more controversial things from George Washington's presidency. He also helped to secure credit from the Dutch. This is what you're supposed to do when you roll stuff out, right? And then John Adams ran to be vice president under George Washington. Back then, they voted for vice president and president separately, and he won. Back then, the vice president didn't really have many jobs, and it was kind of a useless job. It wasn't like respected at all. John Adams actually said, "My country has in its wisdom contrived for me the most insignificant office that ever the invention of man contrived or his imagination conceived." So yeah, he was saying that his job was pointless and he kind of hated it. I don't know where I'm going with this. I don't know if this is supposed to be a square or circle. I have no idea. And then after he serves for 8 years under George Washington, in 1796, he runs to be the next president of the United States. Now, he ran against Thomas Jefferson, and he beat Thomas Jefferson by 3 votes. There's probably a few reasons for this. People didn't really like Thomas Jefferson's relationship with France. They thought that he was kind of an elitist. And also, Northern voters wanted a president from the North to represent them. They had a Southerner in office for 8 years, and they were like, all right, time for one of us. Thomas Jefferson came in second, and this made him the vice president. I'll pick that up later. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams belonged to different political parties. John Adams belonged to the Federalist Party, and Thomas Jefferson belonged to the Anti-Federalist or the Republican Democrats. John Adams was pretty short. He was only about 5'6", and he was kind of stocky, and he had a temper, and you know, everybody that was close to him thought that he was very warm and very generous, but people that didn't know him really well thought that he was cold, that he was kind of conceited, that he just didn't really know how to talk to a lot of people. And he was also sick, like a lot. This is actually kind of ironic because he lives till he's 90. He was sick for most of his life. He lost most of his teeth by the time he got to the presidency, and he refused to wear the dentures, the like gross dentures that they had back then. He refused to wear them. So he spoke with a lisp during his presidency. Let me paint you a picture. You're in the 1700s. You just had George Washington, 6'2", war hero, everyone loved him. And then 8 years later, John Adams, short, stocky, bad temper, emotional, takes his place. You know that King George in England was like, you guys left me for that.
President John Adams, good luck.
Talk about a downgrade. Throughout most of George Washington's presidencies, the war between France and Britain was pretty neutral. But then when John Adams took office, things started to heat up a little bit. And both France and England were both trying to get America to support them. They were like,
pick me, choose me, love me.
And it started to really affect American trade. I think I'm messing up this dough a lot. So John Adams sent 3 delegates to France to negotiate a treaty with France. Now, the French king was like, I'll talk to your boys when you give me money. He was trying to get a bribe from John Adams to sign this peace treaty. John Adams was like, nice try, we're not doing that. So instead of having a full-on war with France, because John Adams knew that we couldn't afford that, we were a baby country, we didn't have the money or the resources to really get into a full-on war. So instead, he decided to expand the Navy. And America and France had an undeclared naval war for 2 years until a peace treaty was finally signed. This, while some people didn't love it, was generally well received by the public, and historians today are also on board with this. You know, he was able to avoid a full-on war. However, John Adams really ruined his whole reputation with basically one act. He did this by signing something called the Alien and Sedition Acts. Now, the Alien and Sedition Acts basically said that the government could deport anyone that was an enemy alien, so anyone that was from somewhere that they were in war with, and then also that they could arrest anyone who outspoke against the government. Obviously, this was not well received by basically anybody because America basically just escaped from an oppressive government. So obviously nobody liked this idea. Thomas Jefferson was like bashing him because remember, he was one of the people that didn't think that the government should have a lot of power, and neither did a lot of his other cabinet members. So John Adams basically lost all support of his cabinet doing this, even the support of people from his own political party. And this is bad. This is awful. This is not what you want when you're a president. So basically, John Adams stopped listening to these people. He stopped listening to the people in his cabinet. He stopped listening to his advisors, and instead, he started listening to Abigail Adams, his wife, and his other family members for advice. And even though this Alien and Sedition Act was never really abused and even had built-in expirations, and it was all just, you know, in the name of protecting America, it really killed John Adams' reputation. This has to chill for an hour, so I'm just gonna pop it in the fridge. All right, I had to peel and cut like 10 apples, so that's probably gonna be the bulk of what you're seeing right now. So in 1800, John Adams becomes the first president to live in the White House, but back then it was called the President's House. And he had really high hopes for the presidents, and he said that he hopes that only people of honor will live under this roof, basically. And then Abigail Adams moves in, and she's like, this house is cold. This house is big. This house is, you know, it's a mansion, but it's not homey at all. So luckily for them, they only lived there for about 5 months because then the election of 1800 happens. These apples look really bad. Yeah, so even with these last 2 elections, the election of 1800 is still regarded as one of the most brutal. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, they both had journalists writing for them, basically bashing each other in the news. Thomas Jefferson said that Adams had a hideous hermaphroditical character. I don't think that he meant this literally. I don't think that he meant that John Adams was born with both male and female reproductive parts. What I think he meant was that he was referring more to his character. Now that we know John Adams was a bit emotional. He had a temper and he was often very depressed and paranoid. So I think Thomas Jefferson was more commenting on that, saying that John Adams was feminine because he was emotional. I think that's what he was saying. It's not like John Adams didn't get any hits in. John Adams said that Jefferson was a mean-spirited and low-lived fellow. And there was also a rumor that Thomas Jefferson died so that people would only have John Adams to vote for. All right, Tom, how do you like them apples? Get it? Apples? Okay, I'm done. Alexander Hamilton also had a few things to say about John Adams. He published a pamphlet that said that John Adams was unstable, he was unable to coexist with his advisors, and he was unfit to be president. This was like kind of true. It's okay, I have extra. So clearly, John Adams was not everybody's favorite guy at this moment in time after passing this crazy Alien and Sedition Act. And this all led to the fact that Thomas Jefferson won this election, making John Adams the first one-term president to lose re-election. So John Adams never owned any slaves, and he outspoke against it constantly. Now, he was a realistic man and he knew that America was fragile, so he was more in support of a gradual ending to slavery because he knew that America couldn't take a war. And he was pretty right because the Civil War was pretty devastating. And I don't think that America would have survived it in its first stages. John Adams passed down these ideals to his son, John Quincy Adams, and the two of them were the only two of the first 12 presidents who never owned any slaves. Now, you can't talk about John Adams and not talk about his relationship to Thomas Jefferson. I mean, you might as well call them Blair and Serena because they were straight up frenemies. Remember, Thomas Jefferson kind of had drama with everybody. I like to think of him as kind of like the situation of the founding fathers.
I just have unbelievable mass appeal.
Also, I'm fully aware that some of you will get my references and some of you will not, but I thought about it and I'm okay with it. Let's rewind all the way back to 1775, about 20 years before John Adams becomes president. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson meet when they're both serving as delegates to the Continental Congress. And John Adams actually personally selected Thomas Jefferson to write the Declaration of Independence. And he even defended the Declaration to all the other founding fathers and basically convinced a lot of them to sign it. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were extremely different in looks. Thomas Jefferson was very tall, very thin, and John Adams was pretty short and pretty stocky. So it's kind of like me and all my friends from high school. I understand John. And they bonded even more because they were both delegates to European countries. Thomas Jefferson was a delegate in France. John Adams was a delegate in England. And they bonded over this, being far away from home, serving overseas. And John and Abigail Adams even helped console Thomas Jefferson after the loss of his wife. Everything was going great in their relationship. It was Tommy and Johnny against the world. And then they came home and they both worked under George Washington in his cabinet. John Adams was the vice president and Thomas Jefferson was the Secretary of State. And they disagreed on everything. It was honestly all the same stuff that Thomas Jefferson and George Washington disagreed on. It's just that John Adams always took Washington's side. And this really, really pissed off Thomas Jefferson. I can imagine because it was his friend, and you think that your friend's gonna have your back, but John Adams was like, no, I care more about the future of this country than I do about your friendship, so I'm always gonna support Washington. John Adams was pretty hurt, he was offended, he felt betrayed, and this led to his resignation. So after Thomas Jefferson resigned, Adams kind of started talking shit in letters to his sons about Jefferson. He said that Tom expected to be summoned from the familiar society of Egeria. They think that John Adams was basically calling out Thomas Jefferson for a relationship that Thomas Jefferson was having with one of his young slaves. John Adams referenced a story from Roman mythology where a goddess named Egeria became the lover to a widow named Numa. So he thinks that he was referencing Thomas Jefferson's relationship. And the second thing that they think that John Adams was doing is saying that Thomas Jefferson expected to be summoned and called back and fully supported the second that George Washington left office or died. Thomas Jefferson ran for office in the election of 1800 that we talked about a little before. And Thomas Jefferson won. He won against John Adams. This basically put the nail in the coffin of whatever John Adams and Thomas Jefferson's friendship was at this point. Their friendship was over. Their friendship was dead. When Thomas Jefferson won, John Adams did not attend his inauguration and he was already on his way back to Massachusetts. And they didn't speak again for 12 freaking years. 12 years. These founding fathers seem to be really, really petty. I mean, come on. So after the election, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams' relationship was basically dead. Until 12 years later, when one of their mutual friends named Benjamin Rush went up to John Adams and he was like, hey, I had a dream last night that you and Thomas Jefferson made up. I had a dream that you sent him a letter and it sparked this never-ending friendship. Now, Benjamin must have been pretty freaking psychic because that's exactly what happened. John Adams wrote Thomas Jefferson a letter and he was like, hey, I miss you. Let's talk this out. His exact words were, you and I ought not to die before we have explained ourselves to each other. Isn't that kind of beautiful? I don't know about you, but I'm definitely gonna use that. Definitely gonna start all of my texts like that after a big fight. And I guess Tom Jefferson missed his friend John Adams too, because this sparked the bromance to end all bromances. Last apple, finally. John Adams starts up communication with Thomas Jefferson again, and it sparks this like never-ending bromance. They end up writing 158 letters to each other throughout the years. They talk about everything. They talk about their old disputes. They talk about what's going on in the country. They even talk about the rising tensions between the North and the South, hint, hint, the Civil War. And they write up until they're all like old and stuff. And Thomas Jefferson wrote, crippled wrists and fingers make writing slow and laborious. But while writing to you, I lose the sense of these things in the recollection of ancient times when youth and health made happiness out of everything. Doesn't that just make your heart melt? I mean, Thomas Jefferson was pretty racist, but man, could he write. I'm actually kind of excited for this one. I was not excited for Martha's, but the dough has been chilling for about an hour, so I'm just gonna go ahead and roll it out now. Hopefully it's right. I don't know about the dough. This recipe is really vague. Mom, where is the pie dish?
I don't know where the pie plate is. All I know is I better get some of this pie.
She's crazy. I honestly don't know if I did the dough right at all. Oh wait, am I supposed to grease this? It doesn't say to. I think because there's so much butter in the crust, I think it'll be okay. So after Thomas Jefferson and John Adams make up, they are friends until the very end. When John Adams dies, his last words were, Thomas Jefferson survives. What John Adams didn't know is that miles away, Thomas Jefferson already died hours earlier on the same exact day. That day was the 4th of July and the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence that Thomas Jefferson wrote and John Adams defended. I mean, come on! You can't make this stuff up. I mean, you could, but I'm not. That is so poetic. I totally skipped a step. Just gonna unpeel that. I don't even know what molasses is. I can already tell that this crust is thin as hell and this is gonna be messy. This is what we're working with. It's very liquidy. I don't think that's right. So we'll see. I'm gonna pop it in the oven now and kind of just see what happens. All right, so I took it out of the oven. It said to only cook it for 10 minutes at first, and then I'm supposed to do something. The recipe says to dowdy the dish by cutting the crust into the apples with a sharp knife. I don't really know what the hell that means, so I'm just gonna do what I think it means, and hopefully it works out. I just dropped liquid all over my feet. Anyway, I'm gonna pop this back in the oven at 325 for an hour. So hopefully I'll see you when I take it out. Hopefully I will. I'll see you. Hi guys, all right, so I just took it out of the oven. This is it. It looks and smells delicious. It's definitely not pretty, but I'm hoping it'll do the job. All right, so here's the pan dowdy. We had a few mishaps in the oven, but it looks good, smells good. I definitely think the proportions of this recipe were way off, but that's not my fault. So after all of this happened with John Adams, and after he died, he did not and has not received a memorial in Washington, D.C. I mean, even in Hamilton, his character is not in the play. He's mentioned, don't get me wrong, but he's mostly mentioned just to ridicule him. I couldn't really find any particular reason why Lin-Manuel Miranda decided to do that, but I just thought it's interesting. Basically, the only way that people even know that John Adams existed is from an HBO special from 2008, which, by the way, I have not seen. He's not remembered as a great president. John Adams kind of knew that the world was gonna remember or not remember him this way. He said, "Mausoleums, statues, monuments will never be erected to me. I wish them not. Panegyrical romances will never be written, nor flattering orations pronounced to transmit my character to posterity in glorious colors, no, nor in true colors neither." John Adams knew that he was kind of sandwiched in between these two-term great legacy presidents, and he was just a one-term president whose presidency was not remembered as great. Even though historians now are commending him for being able to keep the country out of war, he's still just not really honored at all. And there have been plans to put a monument in, but there's not really been anything concrete. John Adams was one of the only first 12 presidents who didn't own any slaves, and John Adams also didn't receive a monument in Washington, D.C. Do whatever you want with those two things. All right, so let's go ahead and try it. Definitely gonna be messy as hell. I said to eat it with whipped cream, so here we go. Smells so good. Oh my God. It's really good. No offense to Martha, but Abigail kicked your ass. I don't even know what else to say about it. It's freaking delicious. I'm pretty sure I messed up the recipe in like 100 different ways, but it's still delicious. All right, so that was the story of John Adams. Do I think that John Adams was a good president? Not really, and here's why. He couldn't communicate well with his cabinet. He didn't have the support of anyone in his party or against his party, and that really does affect your ability to be a good president. I think that John Adams was somebody who had really good intentions, but he just didn't have the personality or the people skills, and he couldn't connect with people on a personal level. He didn't really know how to read the room, and that is why signing that Alien and Sedation Act was just really detrimental to his presidency, and it followed him even until this day. John Adams, is he as hot as Paul Giamatti? Yes. Honestly, I think they're kind of on the same level. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. You guys have no idea how much it means to me. I hope you're enjoying the videos. I hope you're learning something. As always, I strive for historical accuracy, but there is a lot of information out there. So if you have something to say, comment down below. Be nice in the comments. Also, all of my resources, as well as the recipe and also a podcast that I was listening to called Presidential, will all be linked down below. I would really like to thank my grandma for sponsoring this video, basically. I love you, Grandma. And I will see you next week for Thomas Jefferson.